Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I am Kristen Boyce, a licensed marriage and family therapist with a private practice, Pathways to Healing Counseling. Through conversations, education, strategies, and shared stories, we will be closing the chapter on all the thoughts, feelings, people, and circumstances that don't serve you anymore and open the door to possibilities and the real you. You won't want to miss an episode, so be sure to subscribe. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. I am so grateful you're here this week for today's episode. If you want additional support on your healing journey, be sure to grab the journal at Kristen, Kristen, Boyce, BOICE.com/free resources. You'll also be on the newsletter with my weekly blogs. You'll get a newsletter once a week with helpful information to support you. So you are not alone on this healing journey. And today's topic is one that I couldn't talk about enough because we need to bring more awareness to what is emotional neglect and abandonment. How do we heal from it? We talked about what does it look like. We've shared a little bit about our own stories and the importance of doing your own work so we don't continue to create the same patterns and cycles. So let me introduce you to my guest today. Kaytee is a psychotherapist and author with a passion for working with survivors of relationship and family trauma. She is the author of 4 books, including Breaking the Cycle, The 6 Stages of Healing from Childhood Family Trauma, and Healing from Parental Abandonment and Neglect. She and I talk in length and in depth about really what does it look like and what are some examples of abandonment and neglect and what's the continuum of how that manifests and what can we do about it to heal. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Kaytee Gillis. Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. This is a topic that has touched every single client that I've worked with in some capacity. We're talking about parent neglect, parent abandonment, emotionally. It could be emotionally, mentally, physically. It comes in many different formats. And I'm so excited about my guest today. Kaytee, welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy that you're talking about this and that we as a field are talking about this topic more.
Me too. I feel like clients don't really even are aware of it. Where do you begin to explain to somebody, what does this mean? Because you wrote a new book and I love it. Healing from Parental Abandonment and Neglect. You also have Breaking the Cycle. Love your titles.
Thank you.
Let's define it for folks that are like, well, I don't know. I don't think this has affected me.
Absolutely. So it's interesting because when I first started practicing, which I always joke, I don't feel like it was that long ago, but it feels long ago. Like when I first started practicing, topics like abandonment and neglect were really reserved for like those extreme examples where like you leave a baby on the doorstep of an orphanage. And of course, that example deserves its recognition too, but really our field has started to really within the past decade or so start to expand its knowledge on what abandonment looks like and how parents can or caregivers can abandon their kids right in the same home, or they can abandon their kids by kicking them out. They can abandon their kids when they're adolescents, kids, young adults. Like it's really, we've expanded our understanding of what it even looks like. And things like neglect as being more than just making sure that the kids have clothing and stuff like that. Because I remember when I was in school, words like neglect meant that someone was showing up to school maybe dirty or maybe their clothes were ripped or ill-fitting. And of course, that deserves its place in the conversation too, but it's definitely not just that. And so I'm glad that we're expanding our knowledge to understand that like neglect is like all the ways that the kids are not getting their needs met, which can, be a spectrum. Same thing with abandonment.
So if someone says, well, how do I know if I was emotionally abandoned? Because that's the one I see a ton of.
Mm-hmm.
How do you explain that to someone that's really struggling with, well, I had food, I had a shelter, how do you explain emotional neglect?
So a lot of times I notice that people they'll say that question that you just said. How do I notice or how do I know if I was emotionally neglected or how do I know if I was emotionally abandoned? There's something making you ask that question. So let's explore it. And a lot of times people find out, was there a time of need that you had growing up, which every child is going to have a time of need. So that's usually kind of easy to go to. Who was there for you? Were your caregivers there for you? Were they not? Was that the time that they were the cause of that time of need? Many of my clients maybe had like a mental health episode when they were young, or maybe they came out as gay or trans or anything, and their parents decided, okay, that's it. I'm rejecting you. I'm abandoning you. I'm not going to be there for you. And just kind of either, and again, I always say it's a spectrum. Like sometimes it can be a lack of understanding of what the kid's needs. I'll see that sometimes, all the way to most of the stuff I work with in my personal experience is like the extreme end where it's like the parents chose not to see it. They chose not to care, or they did see it and they didn't care to help. They didn't want to help. They didn't do what they needed to do to protect the people, the kids in their time of need.
Yeah. So I've had some cases where there's been sexual abuse and they feel like maybe one of the parents knew. They're like, I think they knew, but never did anything about it, or a family member knew. How
I
does
see that
that
a lot.
tell us about that? Like how that plays out?
I see that a lot where someone comes forward about being sexually abused, or even if they haven't come forward, but they thought a parent knew, or maybe I'm thinking of a few of my clients where they did tell a parent or they told someone and they were punished for coming forward. They were blamed, they were punished. You're ruining the family, you're breaking up my marriage. Look at what you've done. And that's, I think, an extreme side. But that extreme side is what I see a lot, in people who were blamed and shamed for coming forward again in that time of need. So they're a young, vulnerable person who's coming forward about being abused and needing to be protected. And instead of protecting that child is then blamed for what is happening to them. I see it a lot with sexual abuse. I see it a lot with there's dysfunction and abuse and all kinds of different ways happening in the house. And one of the children comes forward and maybe they report it to an adult outside the home, and then they're punished again by the family as soon as word gets back that you told.
So I feel like then it holds. How do you think that manifests for someone that maybe never said anything? And they're like, you know what? I just felt like that was going to happen to me. If I told, they were going to make me the wrong person. I was going to be cut off from the family or ousted in some way emotionally, even if you were still in the family system. So they're like, I could never come forward because it was too scary.
Oh, yeah. And
Right, of
that's the thing.
holding that. Yeah.
The fear, like if you can imagine that fear, that terror of being a young person, and that is their only, because when we're children and we're growing up, and if our family is abusive or unsafe, that's the only thing we know often. So even though there's a part of us that's like, this feels unsafe or scary, we may not have the insight to know that unsafe and scary isn't normal. We may not know that, okay, there are other families that aren't scary. So it's hard for children to know, children think this is normal. What's happening to me is normal. Not being able to come forward is normal. Maybe it is my fault. Because if they are robbed of the ability to have healthy anger and towards what's happening to them, which is needed to heal from abuse or trauma, instead they're going to turn it inward. So they're going to blame themselves. There's all that inner shame, that self-blame. And then I see it manifest even in adulthood where they learn that people are not going to save them. Others are not going to protect them. So people are unsafe. Adults are unsafe. Other people are unsafe. Definitely, it affects everything about who they are and how they relate to the world, how they relate to other people around them.
Yeah. I feel like it's a huge navigator inside their nervous system.
Yes.
Like you don't trust anybody. I feel like hyper responsible almost was what I've
Yeah.
seen a lot of clients. Like they take over responsibility or they become really busy or successful or whatever it is to move away from what happened to them. Do you see that?
Oh, absolutely. I see that a lot with people who became kind of like hyper independent. And I see that even with myself as a survivor. Like I had to adopt this sense of like, all right, no one else is going to be able to take care of me. So I better be able to take care of myself in all the ways that looks. And I see that a lot with my clients, that same kind of thing where nobody is going to be there to protect me, whatever that looks like. So I need to be hyper independent, hyper responsible, hyper vigilant of like looking for that next whatever thing is causing fear, that next abandonment, that next sense of pain or vulnerability.
How do people break the cycle of that hyper independence? Because it's a
Mhm.
strong
I
kind of
know.
protector part, right? That says
Oh,
nobody
yeah.
else is going to do it. So I have to. So
Mhm.
how does someone begin to break that hyper independence?
So when I'm working with clients, I like to really start small. If they're so used to being hyper independent in all areas of their life, I will start with something that's extremely, and I say extremely small, but for people listening, they may think that this is big. Things that we maybe take for granted, asking for someone's help. Can you pass me this, please? How do you spell the word blah, blah, blah? Things like that, that maybe we do every day and we don't think are necessarily asking for help. And if that seems simple and there's no shame involved, then moving it up a little bit. So maybe asking for help, asking someone to help you move furniture, asking, hey, this just happened at work. Can I process it with you? Asking a friend. It definitely looks different for each person depending on what it is that they struggle with asking for help. But I like to start really small because if you start with something big, it's kind of like biting off more than you can chew, so to speak. So we start with those like little steps of like developing that comfort of relying on a partner, allowing your partner, asking your partner to take out the trash and then trusting that they will do it and not texting them every 20 minutes. Did you take out the trash? Little things like that. We're learning to trust other people and rely on other people.
Here's what I hear from people. So I ask my partner to take out the trash, to use your
Yeah.
example, and
Yeah.
then they don't do it. Or like they seem to, I have to do everything or nothing gets done. It's like an all or nothing. And
Mm-hmm.
they're convinced, like in a lot of ways, I can see the pattern. Like if they don't do it at work
Yep.
or they don't
It's
do it
not
at
going to get done.
home with the kids or the partner, then it doesn't get done. What do you
Yeah.
say to that?
Yeah, that's a hard one because sometimes we're talking about maybe that is true. There are some people who I tend to see it, not all the time. I tend to see it like with moms. They're the ones that society conditions women, I think, to be the caregivers. I do see that sometimes where they're like, if I don't do it, it won't get done. And maybe they're telling the truth. So I don't want to discount that. But sometimes it's something internal within us that we think it's not going to get done. And really, it's that anxiety of relying on another person. So I think it really depends on the situation. Is that if there is a situation where someone is carrying more of that emotional burden or that responsibility, I definitely would want to validate that for sure. But
Yeah, I think it can depend, but I do see themes for anyone
yes,
that's had, like, they didn't feel protected, they didn't
yeah,
feel heard, they didn't feel seen, they didn't feel like they had to be the responsible one, that theme is carried through
hmm
in their
hmm
life. And
hmm
sometimes they do pick partners that
oh yeah.
mirror this, they're not following through.
We
Do you
tend to
see
pick
that?
partners who are going to like bring out any of those internal wounds we need to work on for sure. I see it a lot, like you said, those patterns. And I see it even with like with partners, but also like even at work where people are like, oh, I have to handle this whole project or it's not going to get done. And so I will kind of do a trick with them where I'll just kind of play, like I'll ask them, I'll just do this thing where I call, and then what? I call the game, and then what? And I let them just kind of fantasize. So they're like, okay, well, I have to do this whole project because it's not going to get done. And then I say, and then what? Well, then the project's not done. And then what? And then we're all in trouble. And then what? And it forces them to kind of go down that anxiety road of like, what is the fear is? Is your fear of getting in trouble? Is your fear of looking bad? Is your fear of getting pulled into the boss's office because the project wasn't done? Because maybe that could be a good thing because then it'll force you to say, hey, I did my share. They didn't do their share. And it can look different, depending on what the thing is, but also like the trash too. So if your partners take out the trash and then what? Well, then the house will smell. And then what? And it kind of forces them to kind of say, okay, nothing bad is necessarily going to happen. Where's the fear there?
Yeah, kinda dot
Mm.
up. I love the "and then what?" My
And then
clients are
what?
like, "Why are you asking me that?" Because 'Cause we're playing the movie out is what I say. Play the
Yeah.
movie out and see
Yeah.
what's at
Yep.
the end of that you're so afraid of.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Because a lot of times it's 6 or 8 steps down, and we've created a whole story in our head that our partner's gonna forget to take out the trash, and then the house is gonna rot, and we're gonna get bugs, and the trash will never go outside again, and our partner doesn't love us, and they don't listen to us, and they don't prioritize us, and then it's like, "Whoa, we're way, way down at the end of the movie."
Yeah. And I
but it's
feel like
real.
it is so real. And I feel like it goes back to the wounded inner child from not
Yes.
getting their needs met, to your point. Like we're going into the neglect and
Yes.
abandonment, and we're all
Yes.
alone in this. That's another talk about loneliness and how that
Mhm.
connects to parental abandonment and neglect.
So when we're neglected and abandoned by the people who are supposed to be the ones who care for us and nurture us and protect us, it can feel like a constant sense of loneliness. And it shows up even when people are in relationships. It kind of makes people, I see sometimes clients will kind of strive for like that constant need to be falling in love. I'll see that a lot because they get that burst of I'm loved, I'm needed, see, I have value. Or I'll see it on the other side where people avoid relationships because relationships will harm me and people are scary, people aren't reliable, people will cause me pain. But this constant sense of loneliness because it's an unmet need, it's a loneliness that can't be filled with people in adulthood. It's like an empty hole that just is never patched. And people try to get it patched through all kinds of different things. Sometimes it's substance use, sometimes it's like overworking, overexercising, all kinds of different things. But it's often like that sense of that loneliness. Like you didn't feel, if a child doesn't feel like they have value and worth, that impacts them.
I also think people will try to get that through their kids. So
Yes.
they didn't get it, then their kids are, you don't appreciate me and you don't
Yes.
respect me. And it's deep. And I'm like, okay, those are indicators to say maybe you had some parental neglect or abandonment.
Yes. If you're trying to get that need met through your children. And sometimes, like when I'm talking to clients about that, I start to kind of tread lightly because I realize it's a sensitive thing. Because the number one thing I think that all of us do, if we all have one commonality, I think it's that we didn't want to be like our parents, no matter what. You know what I mean? Whether our parents were abusive or whether they were just normal people with normal dysfunction that exists like normal people. I think that's the number one thing we all have in common as humans is like we all try to do better than our parents. So to even suggest that there's any kind of dysfunction can be very sensitive, and I fully respect that. But I do sometimes see that where they're trying to get that need met of like that my child doesn't want to spend time with me, they don't care, they don't appreciate. That's a common one. They don't appreciate the things that I do. And we're talking about someone who's 8 or 10 or 12 who doesn't have any concept of appreciation of what that looks like.
I hear that a lot. They don't appreciate me. And I'm like, and I get that. I
Oh, for
totally
sure.
get that as a parent. I'm like, I can feel that. And I also hear people say, well, they don't know how good they have it compared
Yes,
to what
I'll
I
hear
have.
that.
Do you hear that?
I hear that they don't know, like, they don't know real abuse. I experience real abuse. I think that's the most common I get from adults when I'm working with families. I work a lot with adolescents. So then when you work with adolescents, you end up working with the parents. So I hear that a lot from parents that will say, and I do think they mean it well. And I think that they really believe this to be true, but they'll say, oh, you don't know dysfunction. I experienced dysfunction. And because generations above will think, okay, if you weren't physically beaten, then that's an improvement. And I'm not like necessarily discounting that belief, but that belief like stays with us. The sense of if no one had broken bones or bloody lips, there was no abuse in the house. So I think what happens is like older generations experience that form of abuse. So they didn't do that. Instead, they did other things. I will hear that a lot. Like, you don't know true dysfunction. And that's so dismissive of the people who are surviving it because they do know true dysfunction. They do. There's just a lack
Yeah,
of insight. Yeah.
exactly. It looks different. And what I hear people say is, okay, so like my mom or dad, they were home. I'm using that in air quotes there.
Yeah.
And so, what is the impact of emotional neglect? So, let's just define that and name the impact of emotional neglect.
So emotional neglect leaves people without like that sense of self, that sense of safety, that sense of like, I have value, I'm seen. Because, when we're developing as children, we're constantly projecting the world like, am I seen? Do I have value? Do I have worth? Am I safe? And by being emotionally neglected, maybe like I'll have clients that will come in with the brand new iPhone, new cars, all kinds of stuff that I never had as a kid. Well, iPhones didn't exist when I was a kid, but things that I never had as a kid. And the parents will really be like, what's this about emotional neglect? Like they have the iPhone, whatever, whatever. And it's just so interesting that we as a society equate, being there for someone with like that physical need. And so emotional neglect is like sometimes things can be put in place of what the person really needs is someone who's there, someone to listen and tell them you have value. You got in a fight with a friend at school today. Let's talk about it. Let's process it. They need to know that they have a place to learn how to self-soothe, to learn how to identify their emotions. Because if not, they find ways to self-soothe and they find ways to deal with those negative emotions. And they are often not healthy ways because they don't know the emotions that they're experiencing and they don't know how to deal with them.
I think it's the most important quality as a parent to learn how to self regulate. I mean, really kind of soothe yourself so you don't project that onto your kids.
Yeah.
And then be there and tolerate the discomfort of your kids' emotions without trying to fix
Mhm.
it or without just not even paying attention to it. You're like,
Mhm.
oh, that's no big deal. You're overreacting. You're so sensitive, or whatever the
Yes.
parent is saying to the child. Like, get over this. This is not a big deal. You're fine.
Mm.
And I'm like, feelings
Mm.
inside, not expressed. Fine stands for feelings inside, not expressed. So we want them to tell us how they feel and for the parent to be able to listen and tolerate it without dismissing or minimizing it. And I
Mhm.
see with couples that come in this need to be heard for it's a
Mhm.
universal truth, right? We all have it.
Yes.
It is
Yeah.
really intense if we've had emotional neglect or any kind of abuse or trauma. It
Yes.
is that we're thirsty for it,
Yes. Like that
thirsty for
whole,
it.
yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
see that?
Yes. Never feeling seen or heard. And I see that a lot, like you said, with couples, and it's like almost like they're fighting for space to be heard to the detriment of both of them. And that definitely comes from when you grow up in environments where you don't feel seen or heard. You're going to try to get that backlog of needs met through others. And it can be even things like that earlier example of taking out the trash. Oh, they didn't see me. They didn't hear me. I don't have value. It all goes back to that because when we grow up like that, we don't have those needs met. It's going to come out in all of the ways that we're projecting into the world as a person.
And then I find it's like the Wizard of Oz. You pull back the curtain and
Yeah.
like, oh, you have issues too? You
Yeah.
didn't get that in childhood either, and I'm expecting you to give it to me. And I'm like,
Yep.
yeah, neither one of you got it. So it's a whole new deeper dive into this inner child work.
Yeah.
You can heal those wounds because abandonment wounds also, I think, are intense. There's an
Yes.
intensity about them. Would you say
Mhm.
an
Oh, yes.
abandonment wound? Tell me about what you see.
It's hard because I always admit I have a bias because I experienced it. So to me, I see that there's an intensity unlike any other. But again, it could be my bias. I see it as because again, there's no safe space. I sometimes will talk about it as I've seen a safe space for a child help them through all kinds of other traumas that they've experienced more than safe space outside of the family helping them with abandonment. Abandonment really when you leave a vulnerable child, whether it's emotionally, physically, all the ways that that can show up, it goes back to our sense of survival. The child brain, now to an adult, it might seem illogical, but to a child brain, it's like, am I going to survive? If I do not have my parents here, my caregivers, and they do not like me or care for me or think I have value, I may not survive. So to an adult, that might seem over dramatic, but that's the child brain. And so they carry that with them, that sense of like, I need whatever it is. Like, I need that companionship. I need that validation in order to survive.
Yes. I
Hmm.
feel like something connected with me, and I've known this, but it just did. And I love downloads when you get these.
Yeah.
I haven't framed it this way, but this is coming through for me is the lack of protection
Yes.
that you get as a child in whatever form that is equals abandonment.
Hmm.
Because you weren't, I mean, I haven't put it in those
Hmm.
exact terms, but I feel like that lack of
Hmm.
protection is really the heart. And
Hmm.
if you're adopted or things like that, there's many different formats of this, but the lack of
Hmm.
protection and care
Yes.
really is at the core of the wound. Does
Yeah,
anyone care
absolutely.
about me? Do I have worth
Hmm.
and value to your point? And is anyone going to protect me and see
Hmm.
me? So this becomes a driving force within in
Hmm.
all relationships, would you say, in some form or fashion?
Yes, I see it a lot with people where it's like this constant need to feel protected. And that can look like many different things. It can look like worried that the person is going to leave you, worried that the person is going to stray from the relationship. However, will they have my back in social situations? All kinds of things like that. Even, in arguments that will come up, and I'll see one member of the couple be like, oh, well, he's not on my side or she's not on my side. And it can be something about like what restaurant they choosing to go to. Because it's like that protection of, will you have my back? Will you protect me? It's that inner child that doesn't feel seen, doesn't feel heard, doesn't feel protected. And like you said about the protection, it goes back to like everything from when we're vulnerable, we can't do anything. We can't get a job, we can't feed ourselves, we can't do anything. We depend on our parents for that very sense of survival. And when those parents are scary or abandoning, that leaves us with this constant sense of like, oh, the world is scary. The world is not a safe space.
And people aren't safe. Like
And
people
people
don't,
are not safe.
and people don't really care about me, and people don't really are
Hmm.
interested in me. And unless I
Hmm.
do certain things, and
Yep.
then maybe I'll get some attention. So if I look a
Yes.
certain way, or I achieve, or I please, then maybe I'll get something from that. And that's better than
Yep.
nothing.
Yes. I see that a lot like this. Like, I have to bring something to the table, whether it's my looks, my youth, my achievements, my success. Absolutely.
Man, this is deep, I think, for
I know.
so many people, right? I mean, we all want that feeling of feeling loved and that we're worthy and we belong and we're valuable and we're enough. And it's such a quest inside. So, how do people begin to heal abandonment wounds, emotional neglect, abuse? Where do we start? If someone's like, this is resonating for me, how do I
Oh,
even
yeah.
begin?
So the thing I always tell people, and I know this sounds like I'm kind of going back to square one, when people think, oh, this resonates with me, like this hits home, the first step really is that acknowledgement. I think that is the number one thing that holds people back. I will have many clients that are kind of stuck in that denial that, well, that didn't happen because, and then we have all of our list of our Rolodex of excuses. My parents didn't do this, or my parents did that, or my parents had it worse, or dad was just working, or mom was just blah, blah, blah. We have all our excuses. So the first thing really is like that acknowledgement. And sometimes that can look like knowing that two things are true at the same time. Like, yes, mom did work a lot, maybe, if that's true. Yes, dad did have it worse, maybe, if that's true. But I also experienced XYZ. And sometimes that right there is the hardest step. I'll work with clients maybe for months or years before they can acknowledge. And once you acknowledge, it helps you climb out of that denial. And I think sometimes acknowledging is the hardest part because it's so scary.
Hmm.
So it's a reason why most of us are going through this, I think, in adulthood, because in childhood, it's too scary to acknowledge how scary it is. Too scary to acknowledge how vulnerable and scary it was. So we develop forms of denial in order to move forward. So that acknowledgement and that finding ways to to whatever that acknowledgement looks like for people. Sometimes that can look like getting more support and finding a therapist. All people reach out to me, oh, I'm starting to uncover my childhood abandonment and I want to work through it. Like, that's perfect. Finding that support, finding that way to heal.
Yeah, and I think that is so true. The first step is like
Yeah.
no more rationalizing,
Yeah.
minimizing, denying, because they're afraid then they're going to have to make a change. That's what people
Yes.
say. Well, am I going to have to put boundaries in place? Am I going to have to cut off anybody?
Yep.
Am I going to?
Am I going to tell them or confront them?
And so they're like, I don't want to do that. I'm like, we don't even have, that's like way down the
Oh,
road,
that's down the road. Yep.
if at all. I mean,
Yep.
sometimes that is the case. And right now we got to stay here. We got to stay with acknowledging, because I feel like that's a huge piece for people. They play the movie out and they're like, well, then I'm going to
Yes.
have to do this, this, and this.
Yep. And then
And
they're
that,
down at the end of the movie where they've confronted their parents and cut them off, and then the family has isolated them. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. There's this idea that and that's actually one of the first things I say when I do trainings or seminars, I'll say, we don't have to confront caregivers. We don't have to force clients to confront caregivers. Like, that's not, they can begin to acknowledge and heal without confronting. And now, if they get to a point where they need to or want to, that's valid, but it's not imperative. It's not essential, especially in the beginning.
I think that's a nice
Yeah.
upfront permission slip to say, because then that protector part can go, "Oh, okay, well, then I guess I'll go do this because for now,
Yeah.
it's a little safer." So we
Yeah.
do, it's acknowledging, it's moving through those defenses of denial and rationalizing and minimizing. And then what's the next step? Maybe getting support, you said, and then,
So I will, and I do want to kind of follow up on one thing you jogged my mind. I once had a therapist say to me, there's no statute of limitations on healing. Now, there's no statute of limitations on whatever you need to do and what that looks like. So if you decide, okay, I'm going to confront them, or I'm going to get therapy, or I'm going to whatever that looks like, it's not like you've passed the amount of time allotted and you're no longer allowed to acknowledge. Absolutely not. So I do like to kind of to preface it, you jog my mind with that, because once we acknowledge and then we go into support, sometimes people will, again, it's like almost this denial of, well, so much time has gone by, or my parents have passed, or they're old and they're in nursing home. Like, is it even worth acknowledging it? I mean, what's the point? Why should I go back there? And again, and I say it's okay to have multiple minds. It's okay to say, but I don't need to confront them, but this happened and I need to move forward. It's okay to have all of those forms of healing at the same time and validation.
that's the and in both, like you said. I love an
Yeah.
and in both. Both two
Yeah.
things can be true. And
Mhm.
I also hear people are afraid, like, oh, my kids have a relationship with him now and it's different than what I had. And so I don't want to impact their relationship based
Mhm.
on what's now I'm willing to kind of look at some past traumas. And so
Yeah.
that's another fear I'm hearing people say.
And I also see a lot of resentment too, where people
Yes.
will usually, if they had abusive parents and then their parents are not abusive to their children. I mean, of course, as a parent, you don't want anyone to mistreat your children. So there's that happiness or that relief or whatever that looks like. But I also see a lot of resentment. Like, why couldn't you treat me like this?
Mm.
Why couldn't you be kind to me? Why now? And that, I think, is some of the hardest things that I see in my clients.
We're like piggybacking on all that because so
Yeah.
many things are coming up. And the other piece I see is you had a wonderful childhood. It was
You
so
turned out fine.
you turned out great and almost like it never happened.
Yes.
It
Mhm.
never existed. And that
Mhm.
can really play with a client's mind to say, well, maybe it was me. And like everything was great. We had such a wonderful time. And it's almost like that was a total different fantasy of a different life.
I know, and that's one of the reasons why I actually when I say what I say at the beginning of trainings that I give, I will say, I actually encourage people not to think about going out and confronting, at least in the beginning, because that's something that you often have to prepare for, because
Mm.
most of the time, and I think there are rare exceptions, but most of the time, caregivers will do that defense. I think it's a human nature is to be defensive. Oh no, things were fine. It wasn't that bad. Times were different. You turned out fine. I didn't know, or worse than that. And I think that can be extremely re-traumatizing for people who are just starting the process of acknowledging. So I will actually caution against that in the beginning until people are comfortable enough with their honoring their own story that they can deal with any of that pushback, because that's hard. It's hard to hear that no matter where you are in the journey.
It is. And we kind of have a lot of people have this fantasy that the parent's going to say, I am so sorry.
Yes.
And not that that can't happen, but that's probably the lower percentage of parents that have done enough work to be able to say,
Yeah.
I am so sorry. I hurt you
Mhm.
so much and I can
Mhm.
see the impact. And what can I do to help
Mhm.
walk through this with you? I'm making this up. This sounds very
No,
therapeutic, but I mean,
yeah.
it's very rare that a parent's going to do that. And so you're right, kind of getting to that point where can they tolerate that the parent is not going to acknowledge. The parent
Yeah.
is even probably going to deny, perhaps.
Mhm.
Not always,
Most
but
most
most
likely. I tell
likely.
people to prepare for it because and it can set you back. If you spend so long denying and then having the one person who is supposed to care for you, the people who are supposed to care for you, then deny again. I've seen clients regress in their healing. They're like, "Oh, maybe it really wasn't that bad. I should just let it go." Mm.
Shouldn't have brought it up. I shouldn't have said anything.
Yeah, because we do hope for that, we call like the deathbed apology of the movies where the parent decides, I did you wrong and I'm so sorry. And it just doesn't happen like that. I have yet to see it. I don't want to say never, but
I've had one case, and that's it.
okay. Yeah.
One. And it was a deathbed apology, but it was once. I mean,
Yeah.
that's
Once.
I've been doing this 20 plus years. So a long time, just
Hmm.
one time. That says a lot in all the years.
I
And
know.
if I could get the family into therapy, even then it's hard for them. Even
Mhm.
then, when I have the whole family and they're adults and they're adult kids, even
Mhm.
then they struggle with a
Mhm.
therapist's help.
Oh, absolutely. And especially because for my population in particular, I work with a lot of people whose parents were so abusive that it's like psychologically abusive. And so sometimes maybe there's mental illness, maybe there's
Mm.
personality disorder, maybe there's all of the above. And that family therapy can actually be re traumatizing.
Yes, thank you for saying that because there's times where it's not gonna be beneficial, and you
Not,
just
yeah.
named that, and I appreciate you saying that because I
Yeah,
do
that
think
can be
it's
very scary.
reactivating the trauma because the parent hasn't changed a bit, and then they're gonna
Hmm.
do it in front of a therapist, and that can be a re-traumatization, absolutely, so I'm glad you said that because we don't think
Yes.
about that. Have we assessed for those things? Have we before we even take on a family?
Oh, absolutely. Because sometimes I'll see the case where like the mom is, oh, I'm so sorry. And I can't believe it. I never knew this was happening. And something about that just seems like a little bit too perfect to me. And then I find out that she's absolutely putting on an act. And then she gets home and the kids
Fires up.
are yeah, fires up. Like, how dare you take me in that position? And then the kid, like I say kid, but the adult child is now experiencing all that abuse again. You're getting punished again as an adult by that abusive parent.
Exactly, and I have 2 more questions. To
Yeah.
set boundaries, we've
Okay.
used the boundaries, what's okay, what's not okay. We can use different term because sometimes boundaries gets triggering for folks to say. So whatever people are starting to set boundaries for
Hmm.
themselves. Okay, they're
True.
healing, they're doing the inner child work. We're processing what happened, acknowledging
Hmm.
the pain. Now we're ready to kind of set some boundaries with a parent or
Mm.
caregiver. How do we do that?
So the first thing is figuring out what your boundaries even are, which sometimes when I say that, I'll get weird looks. But when we really start, especially coming from a very dysfunctional family, and I always use myself as an example, the first time someone said the word boundaries, I was like, I don't even know what that is other than a fence between a yard. I have no idea what about we didn't have boundaries. They were unhealthy, they were dysfunctional, they were abusive, they were all the above. I didn't know what my boundary was. I didn't know that I could say no to a hug. I didn't know that I could decline a phone call or choose not to answer it. Like I had no idea. And so sometimes my clients will start again very small. Like, what is your boundary? Sometimes I tell them to pay attention about things that come up for you this next week, this next month. What kind of things annoy you? What type of things, what type of conversations? Where do you feel like you're more stressed? Sometimes that can give people a clue about what their boundaries are because at least with the clients I work with, I find that we're starting like right at the beginning. We have to explore what is a physical boundary, what is an emotional boundary, what is a spiritual boundary, financial boundary. All of these things, they're like, I didn't know I could have a financial boundary. All of these things. So starting with that, and then once they are able to figure out, okay, this is my spiritual boundary, or this is my financial boundary, or whatever it looks like, figuring out like giving yourself permission to have it and giving yourself permission to honor it, which again, those small steps, like sometimes that can look like not answering the phone if mom calls, but then allowing yourself to sit with that guilt and fear and sit with it and write about it and process it and journal about it, but sit with it. Sometimes that's what it looks like. Sometimes it looks like telling mom or dad, no, I'm not giving you any more money, or no, you cannot stay with me, or whatever it is that looks like for their dynamic. And then sitting with the discomfort that comes from it.
Mm.
Because there's inevitably, when we start to put up boundaries in a family where we never had them, people will give pushback and you'll become maybe the problem or you'll become scapegoated or blamed or all of those things.
Yeah, you'll be the bad
You'll be the
the
bad, yeah.
bad child.
Look how she's treating me. Look how they're treating me. They're not there for me. I can't believe this. Yeah.
And
Just
look,
prepare.
Susie's
Yeah.
kid is there for them. They are helping them
Hmm.
move and do I mean, name all the things, and now you feel
Yep.
like you're a bad
The
daughter,
guilt trips
child,
will come.
son,
Yeah.
whatever. You're the
Yeah,
bad child.
I tell people be prepared for the guilt trips, and that's part of our work together. Is that once we identify boundaries, I tell them acknowledge all those guilt trips, acknowledge all the feelings, sit with it, tell them to write about it, and then
Yes.
bring it into session next week and just read about what it felt like. And they'll talk. It's always themes of like extreme fear. I'm going to be in trouble. I'm going to be abandoned. I'm going to be alone. Again, playing the movie out because again, it's not the 40-year-old adult who I'm working with. It's the 14-year-old who could never have said no to mom So I end up working with that 14-year-old for that day.
Exactly, and I also think people go, "What if something bad happens to them?"
Yes.
And this is the
Yes.
last thing I did. This
Yep.
is the
I
other
know.
piece. Do you find that with people?
I know we guilt trip ourselves
Yes.
so bad. We will punish ourselves more than anyone else. Like this whole like what if? What if? And I notice like other people cuz I remember once I had a colleague where I was declining a phone call from my mom and she said and this was another therapist who said to me, "You never know when that's going to be your last phone call." And I was like, "You know what? I understand that it to an extent, like those type of statements people say, I think they say them with good intentions. Those are what I call well-meaning, but people who just don't understand. And I'm happy for them that they don't understand what it's like, but you can't put that burden and that guilt trip on someone, especially someone who has had an abusive mom or dad or whatever. That doesn't mean that they have to subject themselves to that again and again because it might be the last phone call. That is a lot to put on a survivor. That is a lot.
It's probably the biggest thing I worked on in therapy because
Yeah,
I was like, I felt so bad. Eventually,
me
they did
too.
die, and I hate saying that, but I had to reconcile, if she dies,
Yep.
can I be okay?
Yep.
And it was a
Me
lot of
too.
internal work. I mean, I did a lot of letter writing too, and I recommend that to clients. Write a
Me
letter to
too.
your parent. So I would be like, I have letter after letter to my mother of
Oh,
just
yes.
trying to reconcile all my feelings. And even
Oh,
after
yeah.
my mom has passed now, and it still will come up, and I am more at peace with it because I think, and as you go along with this, I want to tell anybody keep the letter writing up,
Yes.
keep tending to that inner child to nurture that part that feels so
Mhm.
bad and guilty, like you are
Mhm.
doing something wrong. And the
Yes.
regret will come up. Potentially it won't, but if it does, I want to say it's okay to hold the space for that part. And in the moment, that journaling really is such a critical part of the healing journey, in my
It
opinion.
really is. It really is.
You
I
feel
will
the same
yeah,
way?
absolutely, and I especially with things like that guilt, that shame, that "what if I could," or "what should I have done," or "where should I have been?" All of that that we do to ourselves, the what if. What if something bad happens? When they die, or what if they die? All of those things, and it just kinda reignites all of that, and so writing is a way I have some clients, well, I'll tell them they do, like, audio stuff so that because they don't like to write, so they'll do, like, an audio journal. And then I have some that really like to just write, and I tell them, "Grab a pen and paper too," not necessarily typing, because there's something about that that gets, like, our inner child, that pen and paper.
Yeah, because I think we
Mhm.
associate it with we had to write. I mean, this is a developmental process,
Mhm.
and I think it accesses different parts of the brain when we actually write it out. So,
Yeah, and it slows us down, it's not so mindless. Because
yes,
typing, we can kind of do it, like, mindlessly.
yes,
Mhm.
I like that. It is. It slows us down. It's very true, and that's a huge part of therapy is slowing down, and that can be
And
scary
recognize it.
for people. So I want to also acknowledge that, and I want to tell you that it is the most helpful thing when you can tolerate it and your window of tolerance increases, and you're like, okay, I can do this. Keep
Mhm.
with it. Stick with
Keep
it.
with it. Keep
So,
with it, I
what
know.
has been the most, well, this is a big question, but impactful book you've read or a couple that come to mind that really helped expand you or open you? It
Mhm.
doesn't have to be related to this, but just whatever comes through. Like, what were some of the most helpful books?
So some of the most helpful ones have been some of like the top ones that we hear all the time in the mental health field, like What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. That was probably one of the most impactful for me because it validated so much of the stuff that was like already swimming around in my head. And it was like a duh, Kaytee. Like, obviously, you ended up doing this and that and the other because look what happened to you. But it did it in such a way of like, okay, now that we know we can do better, which I appreciate, especially for people who are ready to change and ready to do better for ourselves and others. So that was a big one. And then anything by like Pete Walker does a lot of the Tao fully healing and that kind of stuff. He does a lot on like CPTSD, and he really opened my eyes a lot to the psychological abuse that can happen in families because there was one quote where he said, I remember reading the book, he said, I just felt so thankful that at one point I had a broken arm because of my abuse. And that broken arm validated everything for me. Like I was finally allowed to say this is abusive because I had something tangible. And of course, we never wish any kind of abuse and we never want to thank anyone for that. But I get what he was saying because as a survivor myself, I was like, it's like that gives us something to kind of put our finger on to like validate our own history. So that was really powerful for me.
Yes, it is so powerful when someone
Mhm.
says, I needed to validate what was going on
Mhm.
because it felt like a mental mind game. And so now I had something external to kind of go, okay,
Mhm.
there it is. I am just so grateful for our conversation and so excited about your books. Where can people find you and your work and your books? I'm going to link them in the show notes too and put them in the newsletter so everybody can click on the link. But if they want to know, where can they get them?
So it's good that you're gonna put in the show notes because my name is definitely weird spelling, but it's my full name, Caitlin Gillis, LCSW.com. And so I have all of my books on there. You can get them through my publisher, New Harbinger, or you can get them Amazon, all the different places that we have. And then my blog with Psychology Today links them also on my Psychology Today page.
You have some great articles. So if in great helpful resources. So I encourage everyone to go out to your website, take a look. If you've struggled with any kind of abandonment, verbal, mental, physical, sexual abuse, Kaytee's got so many good resources. So thank you so much for your heart and your time and being on the Close the Chapter podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the Close the Chapter podcast. My hope is that you took home some actionable steps along with motivation, inspiration, and hope for making sustainable change in your life. If you enjoyed this episode, click the subscribe button to be sure to get the updated episodes every week and share with a friend or a family member. For more information about how to get connected, visit Kristen, Kristen, Boyce, BOICE.com. Thanks and have a great day.